In October of 1940, arriving in India by ship meant stepping directly from the familiar chill of Bristol into the heavy, disorienting heat of Bombay Harbor. Edmund Hargrove, a 32-year-old physician, stood at the rail with his elbows down, already leaning toward the coast. He was a man who decided things quickly, and he had already decided that this was where he needed to be. Beside him stood his wife, Catherine. While Edmund looked at the horizon, Catherine was watching the water, carrying a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat. She was thinking of their 7-year-old son, Marquise. Only weeks earlier, she had left him at a boarding school gate in England, watching him cry as they turned to leave for a mission he wasn't invited to join. Edmund had told her that the frontier was no place for a child. He framed her own presence as a compliment to her adulthood, a distinction that Marquise didn't share. Catherine, who was good at letting things rest, had simply absorbed the choice. Now, at the ship's rail, the scale of that choice was beginning to take shape. To allow Edmund to do this work, they had to leave their son behind. They moved away from the administrative centers of the empire, deep into the northeastern hill districts, where the isolation was absolute. A posting meant to last 18 months began to stretch. Without anyone formally deciding to stay, the months quietly became years. This map shows the physical reality of their situation: 8,000 miles of ocean between the parents in India and the son in Bristol. But the distance also cut through the marriage itself, separating Edmund's mission from Catherine's endurance. To survive here, they had to build 2 separate lives, one focused on the villages outside, and the other on the silence inside. Edmund's life was defined by movement. He traversed the hill terrain alone, hiking for hours through the mist to reach villages that rarely saw a doctor. This violated the norms of the era. Other officials arrived with agendas and paperwork. Edmund arrived with no administrative demands and no one to witness his work. The only thing he carried into these spaces was a vintage, dark brown leather medical bag. He spent his evenings practicing the local language. Despite an accent that made the children laugh, he learned to say, "Show me where it hurts," well enough that the people eventually stopped noticing the accent and only heard the intent. After years of watching him walk into their villages alone, the locals gave him a title: the quiet one who listens. For Edmund, medicine was a physical form of respect. By treating a person's pain with his own hands, he was stating that their life mattered, even in a place the administration had largely ignored. While Edmund was in the villages, Catherine stayed in the farmhouse. Her world was stationary, defined by the long hours of his absence. She managed the stillness by building an interior architecture, a strict mental routine that allowed her to live with his choice without succumbing to resentment. Every single week, without fail, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to Marquez. She translated the hills into ink. She described the way the morning mist sat on the lake, the birds in the valley, and the specific gold of the trees in November. Marquez wrote back from Bristol about school matches and teachers he disliked. His letters were the careful, formal updates of a child growing up in an institution, while his parents lived 8,000 miles away. These letters were Catherine's way of remaining a mother. By focusing her attention on the sensory details of the hills, she was trying to build a shared reality for a son who might never see them. The years accumulated. Marquez grew through his childhood in a school in Bristol, while his parents aged in the hills of India. Eventually, they both arrived at a realization that both halves of this divided life were entirely real, but they also had to accept that both halves would remain incomplete. Edmund looked at this truth clearly. He understood the cost to his family, yet he refused to let it change his direction. Catherine understood it too. She had built a life around a man whose duty to his patients required her to live in the gap between his work and her motherhood, a life defined by focused purpose and a quiet, enduring distance from home.